We're enjoying anticipation, and we are many, and we are here to celebrate the birth of twins. First, some announcements. Some upcoming local readings. Tomorrow, there's a hard choice. Paul Mariani is at UMass in Memorial Hall at 7 o'clock, and Honor Moore at 7 o'clock at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley. On Thursday, Broadside at 7 p.m. has poets Patricia Lee Lewis, Jeannie Zeiger, and Portia Cornell. Jeannie has various readings in the area because she has a new memoir and a new book of poems out, and so please keep your eyes open for those readings, or ask us. Susan Snively is reading on Monday, October 24th at 8 in Alumni House at Amherst. And hoping that there aren't too many more banging doors, but every banging door means another anxious person to hear Annie. So I guess I'll forge ahead. What a happy thing to be presenting as tonight's poet, our own Annie Boutelle, who started it all. I know it's been odd for her to see her face on posters and her poems on postcards all over campus, but what a happy thing. And while we're here tonight to celebrate Annie Boutelle, the poet, and her brilliant 2 books, we cannot proceed without first acknowledging the fact that it was she who dreamed us up. Us here in whatever rendition, whatever auditorium, whatever Tuesday, whatever wonderful poet. A member of the English department since 1984, Annie heeded Ruth Simmons's 1996 call to dream big dreams, envisioning a program to bring an ongoing stream of the God-eyed, tall-minded ones, in Plath's words, to Smith to inspire students as Auden had inspired Plath. And so, with faculty, students, and alumni responding enthusiastically, the Poetry Center was born, with much hard work also. Annie continues as chair of the Poetry Center Committee to guide our efforts and to secure stable and full funding and to develop an outreach program. As a colleague and friend, as the Poetry Center's birth mother and guiding light, she has been, among many other wonderful things, clear-eyed, far-sighted, single-minded, warm-spirited, fierce, visionary, and tireless. So please, before we greet Annie as the fine poet she is, let's take a moment to thank her for her huge gift to all of us. Anne Edwards was born and raised in Scotland and completed her undergraduate education at the University of St. Andrews. As a young woman, she came to the US to teach French at a private girls' school, met and married Will Boutelle. I think she said she planned on coming for a year, but basically stayed. Took her PhD at NYU, I believe in that order. She's the author of Thistle and Rose, a study of Hugh McDermott's poetry, numerous essays on scholarly and popular topics. She's the mother of 3 amazing grown children and an inspirational teacher who held positions at Suffolk University and Mount Holyoke College before joining the English department at Smith in 1984. About 10 years ago, Annie began to write poetry again, which she had not done for decades, since her college days. And in the decade or so since turning back to poetry, at the same time as she was dedicating countless hours to the fledgling Poetry Center, she has managed to write and have published 2 brilliant collections, as well as publishing in such journals as the Georgia Review, Green Mountains Review, the Hudson Review, Nimrod, and Poetry. And she has managed to make that remarkable accomplishment seem, well, natural. Just as she manages with astonishing ease to make poems that are elegant, fierce, gorgeous, and spare, all at once, embodying characteristics one might expect to be at odds with one another, if not mutually exclusive: elegant, fierce, gorgeous, and spare. We begin to see that Annie's poems have an awful lot to do with who she is. Elegant, fierce, gorgeous, and spare. Lest you think so, let me tell you this is not always so with poets. To the above-mentioned qualities, I add the fact that these poems have, as she does, you may have noticed, excellent posture. Grounded, balanced, resting comfortably on a sound and beautiful structure. Then there is the quality of generosity, of spirit and in action, revealed in her teaching, mentoring of students, her collaborations with other artists, and note in this regard to see the exhibition of Susan Heidemann images and inspired by Annie's poems, inspired in turn by an exhibition organized by Hank Van Oss in the Oarsman Gallery now till the end of the month. Annie is also a gifted editor of the work of poet friends. She is one of the most careful and perceptive readers I have ever met, bar none, and a brilliantly gentle and creative critiquer as well. So why would we be surprised by the open-heartedness in her own work? Annie's 2 books of poems quietly offer entry into other lives, other languages, and their quietness belies the depth of feeling that rises up as we look at the world through her clear-eyed gaze. Becoming Bone, Annie's first book, by inches, published by Arkansas University Press this past June, seeks to recover the inner life of Celia Thaxter, one of 19th century America's most popular poets. As Mary Jo Salter says, Annie Boutelle has chosen, in reimagining Thaxter's own voice, to dramatize hints, silences, and the sea. The sorrows and victories of her life are conveyed with sensual, sonorous richness. If much of Thaxter's inner life, like that of so many women, went unwritten for a time, Becoming Bone has redressed the blankness with empathy, depth, and a keen intelligence. Eleanor Wilner writes, like whalers' scrimshaw, images incised on shell and bone, Boutelle's lines seemed etched, indelible, in a language as spare, exact, and essential as necessity itself. She tears aside the flowery veils of feminine concealment of another age to give voice to the inner life of an islanded soul. And Gerald Stern dubbed Becoming Bone a magnificent secret history. In Nest of Thistles, the second of the twins, although they're not alike, really, in a lot of ways, fraternal. In Nest of Thistles, winner of the 2005 Samuel French Morse Poetry Prize, and in part an autobiographical exploration of her childhood in Scotland, Annie applies a similarly fierce intensity to the recovery of her own life and language. And I'd love to try out some of those words, but I would mispronounce them, so I'll leave them to her, and I'm sure you have a treat in store. With patient care, she maps the borders of unrecoverable loss and unbounded joy. Writes Henri Cole, Annie Boutelle's poems are muscular and clean. She writes with her ear, and though death often clings to the edges of them, it unexpectedly breathes life into the surface of things. If you listen, you can hear a heart's quiet roar. Yvonne Boland called these poems of real lyric wisdom. The music is equal to the lived experience, and the experience has found a true music. An Annie poem is a finely handmade boat, a thing of extraordinary beauty, produced with great craft and spirit and materials, and also exceedingly sound and trustworthy, with a little whimsy thrown in, and an extraordinary conveyance to interior and exterior landscapes we would never otherwise reach. It is a pleasure and an honor to present the poet, Annie Boutelle.
Thank you all. Thank you all so very much. This feels not a little weird, as I'm sure you can imagine. I need to give my thanks, first of all, to my strong and loyal Poetry Center committee, to the 2 brilliant directors, Elizabeth Alexander, and Ellen Watson. To Ruth Simmons for her vision of a transformed Smith College. To Carol Christ for her strong support and encouragement. To the department who have stood loyally by through these wild shenanigans of mine. To Cindy Furtak, the Poetry Centre's Rock of Gibraltar. To our interns, past and present, who are responsible for the very beautiful publicity and these poetry postcards. Our current ones are Molly Shea and Sarah Coburn. To my dear students for their energy and inspiration. I'm so happy to see you here tonight, many of you. And to you folks as audience who have been here for us right since the very start in September 1997. We thank you for your loyalty. We thank you for your thirst for the clear water of words, to use Abe Young's phrase. I wanted also to acknowledge that these two books, the poems in these two books, are deeply rooted at Smith College. This is where they are from. And here, I wanted to emphasize, first of all, most of them were written in my office in Pierce, up there on the 3rd floor. But the genesis of each book also came from Smith College. It was the Smith College Museum of Art that invited me to give a gallery talk on a Child Hassam painting. And that was the origin of Becoming Bone. And then the Mortimer Rare Book Room, Martin Antonetti asked me to be part of the celebration of Robert Burns that went along with the gift of some Robert Burns manuscripts to Smith College. And it was that event that had me focusing back on my Scottish childhood and the Scottish language. So my debt to Smith is gigantic, and I'm happy to acknowledge it tonight. I plan to read from both books and from some new poems. It'll be about 45 minutes total, and I hope it will be varied and enjoyable, both. There's a little bit of background it's probably good for me to lay out in connection with the first volume of poems, Becoming Bone, because they're in the persona or voice of Celia Leighton Thaxter. When she was 4 years old in 1837, she and her family moved from Portsmouth to the lighthouse on White Island in the Isles of Shoals, where her father, Thomas Leighton, had taken the post of lighthouse keeper. And so she grew up in that very remote place. When she was 11 years old, Levi Thaxter came out to the islands, and she met the man who would become business partner to her father. He proposed to her when she was 12, and they were married shortly after her 16th birthday. 3 children were born in fairly quick succession, and it was a very unhappy marriage in general. And what initially intrigued me about this woman was the way that she reinvented herself as poet, as nonfiction writer, and as artist, painter. She became a very popular figure of the time, had hundreds of very famous friends, and she's immortalized in the Child Hassam paintings, through which we mainly remember her today. So this poem comes from the first winter on the island, White Island, January 1840, and it's called Cold. Rime rings the rock, ink freezes, wine congeals to splintered stars. On passing boats, men tied to the bows lean and strike the ice, jockeys whipping their horses. Whacking what was once a wave, but clings now, builds, and hauls boats down. We are bound by ice. Father heats a coin on the stove, holds it in his leather glove, presses it against the darkened glass, and watches as heat chases ice. Through a penny-sized hole, we peer at a round and polished world of hardening water. Mirage is set on White Island in July of 1846, and this is the moment of the meeting of Celia Layton and Levi Thaxter. All morning long, at shifting edge of shimmering sea, cloud towers waver, stretch, and shrink. Ships ride on air, hulls tall as Boston buildings, sails like giant blossoms opened wide. He arrives at noon, the Harvard man, uncertain, stumbling from the boat. He straightens, shades his eyes against dazzle, and the cloud towers shiver just beyond his shoulder. Laundry, set on Appledore Island in October 1850. Stark against a cobalt sea, his nightgown billows. The tail of his shirt flaps and rises, tugging the line, where next to mother's monthly rags, my nightgown rises, white and winsome, a shy exhalation. Her first child, Carl, was born on Appledore Island in the July following the marriage, with a midwife in attendance. It was a very difficult birth, and Carl was supposedly brain damaged at birth and was a cause of great concern for her for the rest of her life. Birth, Carl. Blue as a skinned rabbit, he is pulled from my body. I am somewhere else when it happens. They tell me pincers gripped his head and hauled him out. They show me the marks, scarlet, dented puckers on the pale flesh. Like a skinned rabbit, they tell me again, he was that blue. I turn my head away. This poem has the title of Celia Thaxter's first published work, Landlocked. It was a poem that was sent by a relative, probably one of her brothers, to James Russell Lowell, who was the editor of the Atlantic Monthly. He gave it its title, Landlocked, and it was published anonymously, as was the custom of the day. My poem is set in Newtonville, 1861. Turning her back on brawling boys, unemptied chamber pots, the bolted bedroom door, she dips her pen in gullible ink. Have patience, here are flowers and songs of birds, beauty and fragrance, wealth of sound and sight, all summer's glory thine from morn till night, and life too full of joy for uttered words. She learns to lie, calls it her little poem. They pay $10, and she recalls how last summer Mrs. Bliven said, "No one is paid for making a string of shells." 1863 Bodies. Tom Thumb and his bride, 2 feet 8 inches tall, stand on the polished top of a grand piano to greet their guests. In Richmond, men riot over bread. Gettysburg's streets are black with bundled bodies, prowling dogs. In New York City, mobs attack the colored orphan asylum and, finding the orphans gone, kill whomsoever they can. In England, 30,000 die of scarlet fever. In Ireland, once again, potatoes rot. And in Paris, a painting of a naked woman picnicking with 2 clothed men can somehow shock. Charles Dickens was in the United States in 1868 for a reading tour, and his base was 148 Charles Street in Boston, which was the home of James Fields, also an editor at The Atlantic, and Annie Fields, his wife, who was Celia Thaxter's closest friend. So Celia Thaxter was invited to the grand dinner that they gave, and in fact, Dickens woke up in the middle of the night and his mind filled with the vision of Celia Thaxter and all the stories she'd been telling him at the dinner table, and he reported this to Annie the next day. Dickens was also suffering from gout during this period of time. So Mr. Dickens, April 1868. He sits beside me at the formal dinner beneath the candelabrum brought from Rome, leans close as I tell of the shoals, the wreck of the Sagunto, the midwife and her boat. He has been so weak he could only sip the liquids Annie brought, cream, rum, champagne. With plump fingers, he touches my shell necklace, swears he feels the salt breeze on his cheek. Beneath the table, his swollen foot throbs in the black silk pouch made by Annie's hands. And this one is set in Watertown, 31st of May, 1884, deathbed, Levi Lincoln Thaxter. They had been separated for several decades at the time of this poem. They let her visit his deathbed only when they choose. He has a sister and son to wait on him now, no need of wife. On the last day, having ceased the screaming and the thrashing, he lies still. She looks down at the yellow flesh, the sheet drawn over the belly, hiding the heat of the infection. She touches the harp string of rib, fluted and clean, naked without its flesh. She softens as he hardens. Nothing remains to forgive. Hour by hour, he is becoming bone. And actually, my favorite poems in the Becoming Bone book happen in the last section, in the last 10 years of her life, when suddenly things start getting much jollier than they were before then. And this is an odd little poem. It's called Companions. It's set in Boston in 1888. And there's a reference in the first line to Moini, who was an Eastern mystic, a follower of Madame Blavatsky, but he took Boston by storm in the 1880s, and he helped Thaxter towards a kind of fusion of Christianity and Eastern religion. Companions. If, as glossy-haired Moini claims, loss is the companion of joy, I see them sitting placidly together on a bench in Louisburg Square. Early September, an eager leaf detaches from the elm above their heads, and swaying as it floats, half buoyed by an errant draught of air, lands on Joy's shoulder as she turns to Loss and asks about his nephews, little Grief and baby Worry. If loss is the companion of joy, must not joy then be the companion of loss? He turns to her, touches her gloved hand, remarks on the angle of the sun, the frost he saw, like lace, on the morning lawn. In the last years of her life, she suffered from both a heart condition and, as we now know from a recent biography of Annie Fields, she also suffered from skin cancer and had 2 surgeries the year before her death. Champagne was interestingly used in order to try to alleviate the pain. It seems to have been a common remedy in the 19th century. But during the latter part of her life, morphine was also used. So this one's called Morphine. This tide foams wide and full as poppy petals. Each new and rippled plane glides shining on the last, dissolves in a shimmer, tumbles on rock, and drenches a nothingness that drags, hauls, spins, slow, slow, in circuits old as a planet's wobbled dance. Oh, bring me needles, ampoules, powder ground by pestle on striated marble. Fetch me the seagull's skull, mask from a Venetian alley, beak arcing white into darkness for this last carnival. The grave flesh melts. What's left is light as bone. And the final poem is called Spirit, 26th August, 1894, Appledore Island. Minna is Thaxter's maid. Later they will say I died like Goethe, asking for light. I did ask Minna to pull the curtain so that light would wake me, but my last request was a soft boiled egg, which they will leave out of the myth. I want to tell them to leave the egg in, to let it sit there in its wooden cup, at the center of a darkening room, the gleam of bone-white shell. So now we're going to take a big leap from the 19th century to the 20th and to Scotland and my Scottish book. And for this, my Scottish accent is required, and I need a little water to help me. No true Scot would be wanting water rather than something stronger. It's a very different book. It's more complex structurally with lots of different threads that wind through it, but the major focus is on my Scottish childhood. And this one is called Bens. Ben is a Scottish word for a hill, and when I first read this poem at Squaw Valley Community of Writers, several people in the audience thought that it was about my former boyfriends, but not the case. Bens. I see them in dreams, Ben Moore, Stabinian, Nevis, Schahalian. Bald and stern, no touch to soften or gentle. Granite heaved up and weathered down to what remains. Nothing more Scottish than these, their inflexibility, their indifference. They condemn pretension and kill fools. Sleeping monsters, these whales of hills have traveled far and plan to go no further. Cliffs, screes, ridges, flints, ramparts, boulders, gullies, such flanks, such haunches, such wide breasts with nipples of cairns that point to heaven as if a godlike child might reach down his lips and suck. Wind wraps them in lamentation. Sun polishes their stubbornness. Moon silver calls to the silver of their calm. Rain lashes and lashes them, and they do not deign to notice. And children looking up see another kind of parent, one that endures. There was a lot of death around me in my childhood, and as my daughter said to me just last week, there's an awful lot of death in this book, Mum. Even the poem that I'm in has got death in it. I won't read that one tonight. I don't want Laura to get upset with me. This one's called Visitants. My dead brother arrives in a rattle of branches or a glazed road. His eyes dark mischief under the fringe of hair. His monkey creased hand on my shoulder, arms banging a welcome to the minnows that roll in the tide of our embrace. My dead sister slips between thumb and forefinger, slice of light, onion skin, unheard note, milk drop, poppy seed, pour. My dead father crashes through drums and bagpipes, all those keening women, trapezes, hunched lions, waterfalls tireless as rock. Nothing will stop him. He pushes past my dead brother and sister, shoves them into the snow. He has come so far, and with such pain. He shows me his feet, toes blue and cracked, soles torn. I want to give him mine. I kneel, rub oil into each bitter crevice. Tomorrow he'll rampage back for more. This poem is in two sections. The title of the poem is 1952, and the first section is called Kilmacombe, which is a little town outside of Glasgow. And the second section is Meters, which is a village in the Austrian Alps. 1952, Kilmacombe. No one told them why they were there, these two wild girls from the Highlands whose parents had waltzed off to Austria. And they didn't like the town's placid streets or lisping Aunt Eva or her clean house. Stranded for 2 weeks, the elder wept her way through each deliberate night, salt soaking the sheets as if it planned to run in long, emphatic trickles down the vacuumed stairs. The younger slept with eyes open and fists curled. In the pruned and weeded garden, they ate the tomato sandwiches, bread pink and slimy. They avoided her stew pot on the back of the stove where the leftovers bobbed. Only one thing helped, the tiny plastic cow they bought. When they filled it and pumped the tail, milk squirted out the udders. They pumped and pumped until they thought its back would split. Meters. Grey sticks shading into black, obsessively she sketched each pine tree on the vertiginous slope, while goat bells chimed and her husband lay on the double bed in the high-ceilinged room, and his sister lounged on the shady terrace, smoking Pall Malls and drinking sherry. Perhaps she thought each pencil stroke might save him, each a strand in the thick rope she'd tossed to the man, making do on one kidney and a cancerous lung in 90-degree heat. Had she thought the high mountain air could fix him? Or gentians winking, could they be blue enough? Or wisps of cloud writing on the sky his passport back to how it was? He lay in the shuttered room, pretending this was how it should be. A sister chatting to the nice woman from Hull, a wife sketching trees, part of him already falling, no longer there in that thin air. One of the threads that weaves its way through this book involves some translations from the great poet Rainer Maria Rilke, and this one is called Washing the Corpse. They had become used to him, but when the kitchen lamp quivered in the draught, the unknown man was again wholly unknown. They washed the neck, and as they knew nothing of his life, they made one up together while they washed him. When one of them coughed, she set the heavy sponge of vinegar on his face. The other woman paused too, and drops pattered down from her hard brush, while the convulsed hand insisted to the entire house that this man no longer thirsted. And he proved it. Embarrassed, they began again with a short cough, more hurriedly now, so that until they finished the washing, their bent shadows whirled and writhed on the silent wallpapered walls as if caught in a net. Night in the curtainless window was merciless, and a nameless man lay there, bare and clean, and laid down laws. Family. From that day forth, Death sat at the table, picking his teeth with a grimy fingernail. When the mother pegged washing on the line, Death crouched on her heart and whistled. When she stirred porridge, he hopped on her shoulder, poured in extra salt. Death curled next to each sleeping daughter, whispered nonsense in each ear, stroked thighs. He tweaked the cat's whiskers, chased the dog, let loose the rabbit, turned cartwheels when the dog came running, fur in its mouth. Death blew down the chimney, pranced in the smoke. Each time the mother saw him, she blanched, but the girls grew used to him, trailing after them, hanging on as they flew down the hill on their bikes. He muscled in on everything, birthdays, menses, kisses. Boring old Death, they muttered. But when Death grew tired and tried to leave, they told him to stay. Even the mother knew she'd miss him, sitting cross-legged there on her heart. Ash. Where is he? Ash scattered on Schiehallion half a century ago has blown to Vladivostok, Lima, Hue. Dust under a woman's soul, speck in the eye, rice shoot rising, plum a dangle. He ate apples in the car, left almost nothing, crunched the seeds, the stiff cartilage that held them in, passed the stalk to his girls in the back seat to wonder at. Crouched down to gut the trout, slicing the belly, pulling out soft organs, bright strings and pouches. The loch turned milky white. Milky pink, I'm sorry. Scales swam on the surface, touched. Each shoe polished to a hard, high shine, small to large, lined up. His hands working the brush, the warmed wax. Pores of leather opened and took it in. All serene. And yes, all undone, taken in, parceled out, extricated. Near the citadel in Hue, a watercress canal. Okay, the next poem is Nest of Thistles, which is the title poem, and it's got a bunch of Scottish words in it. And the best thing is to just let them flow over you. You'll get the gist. You don't need to understand everything. You'll get everything that's important. Nest of Thistles. More comfy than most folk would you lose. Fierce prickles to jab the auld enemies of time and humiliation, down to cushion the bairns. Wee Willie Winkie comin' ben, and a cat singing grey thrums to the sleeping hen. Even the dog spaldered by the fire, disna gie a cheep. No bad in times like these, particularly if you count the perks. Regular delivery of worms, courtesy of the parents. Pink worms of hope. Wriggling ones are warmer than the others. Fat black worms of disaster. Outside a gale spins widder shins and claps clarty hands. Clouds nod defiantly. Rain spits and smurs and sloshes, sneaks through tight seams, threatens to unsettle the whole Clanjamfrey. But then there's a break in the weather, and a wrinkled moon stravagues across the field of stars, pewters each thistle spear, and clads each thread of down in light. Sounds a bit like the weather of the last week. Haggis. How many folk have eaten it? Okay, good, well done. There are a few lines here also from Robert Burns's poem addressed to the haggis. There's a reference to Kerrera, which is an island off the coast from Oban, which is the town I grew up in. And the cover photo on Nest of Thistles is called Kerrera. It's a photograph of the island of Kerrera taken from the Oban side. And my dear friend Annie Raskin is the photographer for that image, and she's here, and I'm thrilled to have you here tonight. Haggis. Cannonball size, it sat with its friends on the marble in the butcher's window. Despite the myth told to tourists, this one didn't run maniacally round hills, so its left legs grew longer than its right. This one grazed on a Kerala field next to reeds and yellow iris. He heard larks sing and waves slap rock near Horseshoe Bay, smelled brine and seaweed, knew his mother's call, and raced to the teat. The flock held him safe. He wagged his long tail. He grew. Then the shifting ferry to lorry and slaughterhouse, his stomach soon an inelegant but sturdy wrap for the chieftain o' the Puddin race. We are so proud of this national dare. Can you eat it? Can you even bear to hear what's in it? Pepper, oatmeal, onion, liver, heart. Each Burns Day, my mother would recite the address, increasing her gusto when she plunged the knife through skin, trenching your gushing entrails bricht like ony ditch, and then, oh, what a glorious sicht, warm reeking, rich. Will likes his fried. Every time we're in Oban, he gets it from the chip shop, doused with vinegar and salt, wrapped in brown paper. He prefers the skin synthetic, crisp and swallowed. But this one's the real Mackay. Steam rises from the slit. Neeps and tatties cradle it. Here, have a spoonful. You'll wash it down with Glenlivet. God knows what you'll see in your dreams. And then there's a cluster of poems, and then they also are weaving in and out, that are poems about writing poems. And this is one of them. It's called Liminal. How does it come, stalking like Wyatt's heart with naked foot, camouflaged in shadows around Snyder's campfire, shimmer at the edge, sparking the flickers that announce my grain, or something softer, unheard vibration in the ear's canal, wrinkle on pond surface, something so imperceptible one perceives, and the body stirs, and heart and mind swing open to what they recognize, a nothing, far from language, far from anything material, an absence that has waited, naked, relentless, for who knows how many God-forsaken ages to find its shape and name. Essence, hint of lemon, sign, sigh, sequel. And this is a bit of Scottish prehistory for you. Bronze Age, South-Uist, 1500 BCE. So my eyes shut, dip me in peat, and let my hair still grow. Let the seeds in my intestine rest undigested, ready to begin again. Watch nails curve long and dangerous, see breasts shrivel. I have no vanity to slow the process down. Pickle me in salt like herring, dry me in wind or fire. Keep me for 500 years. Prop me in your sacred place. Lay mushroom, oats, and wine at my black feet. I'll tell you nothing. Touch my tough skin. Play me your pipes. Chant me the songs of loss and desire, what wounds and heals, the braiding and the combing. Place the jet tenderly round my thin neck. Wrap me in fern and deerskin. Lower me into the stone house whose 6 stout walls give shelter. Plunge me into silence. It has waited so long, it has grown tired of waiting. Try not to find me. And then there are some poems from my adult life, and this one's called Handel. At our water music wedding, Harry Dobbins, who taught me French and German, played the organ, while outside on the hill leading down to the bay lurked a former lover, bearded and professorial, with his new Canadian bride. I had no clue where I was heading as the aisle slipped past, and I clutched Uncle Angus's steady arm. But I could see Will's swallow-tailed back and the cowlick I had touched so many times it felt like mine. I wanted to kneel, Highland Mary on one bank of a burn, and reach out dripping hands to my love on the other side. This troth should be made the ancient sacred way in water. When we stepped out, the piper blew, lover and bride had pulled up stakes. Atlantic breezes ruffled my lace. We opened our eyes, dazzled infants, to salt and light. Okay, I think we're going to move to the United States for this next one, a setting, and I'll try and get rid of my Scottish accent. I'm not always in control of this. It's called The Lover, and I see this as a contemporary ballad. After her physician ordered fine needle aspiration, she called her new friend with the melancholy eyes and asked if he'd come sit with her. His hand reached across the cafe table, cupped her fingers. She could feel the slight prickles crossing from his skin to hers, ambassadors at a border. When her physician ordered surgical biopsy, she went to her new friend's house, sat on the pillow of soft green silk. As she closed eyes and focused on breath, she opened to the smell of him, a country known somewhere, mist-filled and lost, but recognized now. The oval cobblestones glazed with rain, shining like aubergine, so smooth and fine were their polished surfaces. And she wept, for the gift returned to her, the mist and stones, the smell of his skin. When the physician ordered surgery, she went again to the room with its high windows and listened to the wind blowing the prayer flags, the fragile slap of fabric on wood. She slid her hand to her throat, undid the pearl buttons, reached for his hand, and placed it on her breast. It settled there, seabird alighting on a bollard at a pier, tucking its wings. During chemo, she came back often, knowing they'd be lovers one way or another. And they lay for long afternoons, fully clad on the futon, a knight and his bold lady on the hard, throne-like bed, watching the mobile bob and sway in the space above their heads as light darted through the clear windows. Between radiations, he touched her intact breast and murmured of doves, pomegranates, honey. Her breast became a hill for children to slide down, a garden where dark flowers unfurled fragrances. No one had loved her breast as this man did, the tower of its nipple, the pinprick holes, the shadowy areola. Deep below the surface, abandoned paths sang with the patter of hurrying feet. In the hospital, the nurses knew to dial his number each morning at 9. They held the receiver to her ear so she could hear his distant voice. I'm touching it. My right forefinger is circling it. On the 16th day, he said he wanted to take the nipple in his mouth. I'm your child, the voice said. I've been calling for you, ceaselessly, combing each alley, searching each face. Through the fog of drugs, she feels his lips vibrate against her skin, and the tide of white sweetness rises. I'm the child of your death, he says. Give it to me, quick. This poem is dedicated to the great Kashmiri poet who lived in Amherst, and I'm sure there are many friends of Shahid in this room, Agha Shahid Ali. And it plays with a line from one of his very wonderful poems called The Perse Senner, Atlantis. The poem's title is Bridge Street Cemetery, Northampton, Massachusetts, 10th December 2001, for Agha Shahid Ali. Frost fog wraps wheelbarrow in flowers of ice. What keeps this light from pouring out as light? His father lifts spade, implacable weight as sand strikes wood. What keeps this light from pouring out? In each poet's hand, no words but grains. What keeps this light from pouring? Two skeins of geese row between snow and cloud. What keeps this light? The Imam prays, may this whiteness cleanse our hearts. What keeps? And tell us, Shahid, you who are so extravagantly wise, what keeps this light from pouring out as light? What it comes down to. Everything expands and contracts, fills, rounds, quickens, shreds. Garlic is the sine qua non. Clouds are expert. They know how to thin, how to release fingers, how to watch love dissolve. Emotional tears contain more protein. Stingers of bees can be slid out of skin, poison sac intact, if one uses one's nail judiciously. Excrement must be dealt with. Not all the young are happy, nor the old wise. 5% of the young are wise, 2.6% of the old happy. If grief is a tent, joy is no shelter. According to Queen Victoria, who experienced one and observed the other, giving birth is harder than dying. Nothing I've written is true. Each of us is the man in the Balthus painting, carrying the ladder. That's the Nest of Thistles. I am saving words for the very last poem I'll read tonight because several people have asked me for that poem. But the poems that I'm going to read now are the new ones. We're moving rapidly into the 21st century. Some of them are very odd and of a mystical bent, and these are the ones I'll read first. This one's called What I Learn Continued. Worms are our guides. They know how to wriggle in, how to take possession and chew on cunning. Nothing exists that doesn't have a door, some more than one, which may take centuries to find. Locks are intricate and strong, keys built of words and air. The priest knows the words. They came from his priest and his priest's priest, back all the way to the first priest in the first oak grove. I must hide the words in my liver. My lungs provide the air. A grain of wheat is a palace. The hair from a badger's ear, a bridge. Nothing is what it seems. Nothing is my friend. There are holes in me that nothing can enter. Everything can be entered. Nothing escapes, not even the stones. Contest. The horned god and the hanged god wrestle in the dark, thumping their huge bodies on the ground, flattening trees. They speak different languages, throw words at each other, and the words slide off their shoulders, slip down, writhe into snakes that wriggle at their feet. The horned one rips the snakes into hunks and swallows. The hanged one lifts each snake to his ear, grabs wisdom. When the dark is rolled up and tucked on its shelf, they lie down together, wrap their bodies into a tangle of limbs, like brothers. Edge. Weeds tangle at the edge of a field. Air bristles with tiny whirring things that fall and rise at their own wild whim. Do they etch histories on the wind or climb into the swallow's beak? Sometimes they carry messages to whichever god they choose. More often, they find ways to change you into mist, and you can feel them passing through you as easily as a river slipping between its banks, or a cow ambling home in the dusk. How not to dissolve, how not to rush toward nothingness. Light crumbles, leaves you dizzy, hungry for it. I love Portuguese music. I'm glad Marguerite's in the audience. And I especially love Fado and Amália Rodrigues, the great Portuguese singer. So this one's called Fado. Translate it however you choose. There's no note that's not about desire, how not to long, long. Hair tucked into its bun, oiled, while everything else is thirsty, beyond shy, past reason, looking down on scared, and reserve is flung into air, ground under her soul, trashed, so nothing's left, nothing but this line of notes that has to be held on to, that can't be tied, that slips and leads, swallows and reaches, and loses once more as throat opens to let it out, let it climb into a space filled with wisps of smoke and waverings, all that insists on being not, glassine envelope, film on eye, egg-white light, shark skin, tenderness, all that knows deep in its marrow, no matter how long, it won't ever touch this side of never. And then the sort of particularly 21st century ones, which have got some political notes to them. How they fell. One dove as from a high board, arms welded, an arrow aimed at earth, as if he thought it water, and he'd pass through. A man and a woman held hands, sweethearts in an alley, until their grip frayed. The blue shirt of a child billowed and tore right off. Two girls embraced, bodies wrapped tight. All the ties whipped upward. A waiter's apron broke loose, its strings trailing behind. An old man wrenched open his mouth and tried to sing. Someone clutched a broom. Who covered her eyes? Who hummed? Who held his head as if hands protect? Who stepped off lightly? Who clenched teeth? Many wept or cursed or yelled or prayed in many languages. Some counted the seconds as if they controlled something. A toddler laughed. No one fell straight. All of them tumbled. And an event from more recent history, this July, 7th of July, 2005, statue. Fragile the flesh and the blood ardent, while Gandhi sits still ringed with blossom in Tavistock Square. Kids in the back of the Hummer learn how to be soldiers. Which language do Baghdad's sparrows speak? The faces were black, blood poured from them. Folded legs, hint of a smile, his fingers on one thigh, one ankle. High explosive, military, not common in the UK. The mindless camera on each lamppost tapes it. Rivers of folk surge over bridges. 16 people asked if they could buy my bike. Light shivers through leaves to reach his bald head. Each morning the child gives him her secrets. She leans into his hard robe, whispers them. He remembers them all. Firefox. Firefox, as some of you may well know, is a strong and very efficient browser that you can download onto your computer. And its icon is a little bit scary. I'm wanting people to take a look at that icon. Study its icon, blue world clutched by orange fox, whose tail morphs into flame-licking Europe, while nose and paw close on the rabbit ears of another continent. We are in for the kill, surely, 6 inches from our eyes, and the sky blue iMac screen accepts it coolly, though England has long since turned its back on fox hunting, and there'll be no ears here as trophies. And the alleys of Baghdad are not a pleasant place, and the tube burns, howls echo in each tunnel, blood spattering the windows of the hushed museum, and despite your desire, cell phones won't protect you, nor an iPod with its spaghetti strap noose. And yes, we practice torture, just not in our suburbs, at a decent distance. And tell me, when the bombs roost in downtown Northampton, Massachusetts, will the old Caribbean guy still hammer on his steel drum outside the place where Woolworths used to be? And will the Jehovah's Witnesses still knock at your door to tell you it's all to do with Jesus? And how will you answer? You who used Firefox to check out your website, to Google porn, to find quick recipes for rhubarb crumble, and didn't see where it was heading, and in the end it matters less whether you're fox or rabbit, but which way the smoke blows. 2 more, and that's it. Just so you know, Honey Blue is dedicated to that brave woman, that fine poet, Lucille Clifton. Yeah. She gave me the courage to write this. Honey Blue. After 12 years of being gone, her uterus came back at the corner of Chestnut Street, under a lamppost, unabashed, big as a grapefruit, like she saw it last, shrouded in blue paper on the steel tray. Shreds of blue still clung to its scalp. Didn't you miss me? It spoke through its cervix in a harsh, graveled voice. I know what I contributed to your orgasms, all that flipping. And what about those kids I sheltered and pushed out? What happened to them? No magazine had told her what to do. They're fine, she said. An ovary with tentacles dangled from each shoulder. Lost your tongue? It took a hard drag on its cigarette and bogarted the butt. Honestly, don't say it, it yelled. No one's honest that says that word. Yes, she said, yes. Its cervix twisted into a kind of smile. At least you missed me, it said. Where have you been, she said, all these years? Honey, it said, you don't want to know. She bent down, stroked it the way you'd stroke a cat, picked off a fleck of paper, whispered into the place where there might have been an ear. Take care, be well. I missed you, she said. Really, still do. and the long-promised words. Nuala is somebody well known to the Smith community. Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill, the great Irish language poet of the present day. And I'm glad Peggy's here in the audience for this one. Words. When did I forget how to plouter, how to be scunnert, how to look for foozle under the bed? When, afraid of sounding twee, did I stop saying we? Who snatched away douce and duchty? I lost my spurtle, grew too proud to be wabbit, avoided any kind of big stramash. Even when my Libra soul pendulumed alarmingly, I didn't swither. I quarrelled with the Bens, sent the Burns into exile. Did they creep slowly off, little grey mice, looking for another home? No sleekit rodents this side of the pond? How proper it all became. No screech of pipes, no eightsome reels, no raucous ceilidhs, no kayaks with their thin white hairs and whisperings, no burach spreading out across the floor. Nuala sees her language as a boat, a coracle to launch in the bulrushes and send off to some pharaoh's daughter. I saw mine as something like a wart, a fart, a sneeze. And oh, my lost darlings, I run after you now, wrap treacherous arms round you, dust you off, feed you kippers from Loch Fyne and whiskey from Islay, then pin you on the page as witness. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I hope to see you all in Weinstein Auditorium on November 1st for Linda Gregg and Jack Gilbert.